At 7 months pregnant, you never expect a midnight call from the California Highway Patrol. They told me my husband, Carter, was in a horrific car crash. Panic choked me as I envisioned my unborn baby growing up without a father. I drove through the blinding storm to the emergency room, praying for his life, but when I pulled back the curtain, I did not just find a bleeding husband, I found the ultimate betrayal. Hello and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. We are so incredibly grateful for your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us completely without the budget to keep the channel running. If you find today's story compelling and want to support our work, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's journey of absolute betrayal and ultimate retribution. My name is Bridget Ball, and this is my story. At 30 years old and exactly 7 months pregnant, my life felt like a flawlessly written piece of code. I was the lead cybersecurity architect at Aegis Nexus Solutions, a position I earned through relentless dedication and an unyielding obsession with digital security. My personal life was just as meticulously structured, anchored by my husband, Carter. But the illusion of perfection shattered at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The harsh ringing of my phone cut through the silence of our bedroom. It was the California Highway Patrol. The officer on the other end delivered the kind of news that stops your heart completely. Carter had been involved in a severe car crash on the winding coastal highway. Outside, a massive rainstorm was battering the city, the heavy downpour severely restricting visibility. I did not care. Panic gripped my throat, tightening with every breath. I grabbed my keys and drove through the blinding storm, my hands trembling violently against the steering wheel. The tires hydroplaned as I pushed the vehicle to nearly 80 miles per hour on the slick roads. My mind raced with terrifying scenarios. I was utterly terrified that the child growing inside me was about to lose her father before she even took her first breath. Every single mile felt like an eternity, the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers serving as a grim countdown to the emergency room. I ran through the sliding doors of the hospital, soaking wet and gasping for air, ignoring the sharp twinges of pain radiating from my lower back. The overwhelming stench of bleach and antiseptic made me nauseous. A nurse directed me to the intensive trauma ward. My hands shook uncontrollably as I grabbed the thick fabric of the privacy curtain and pulled it back. I expected to find my husband battered and fighting for his life alone. I did find Carter, his head heavily bandaged, intravenous lines snaking into his arms, but the universe has a sick sense of humor. Lying on the hospital bed right next to him, hastily trying to pull up the shredded remains of a ruined designer evening gown, was Valerie. Valerie was the chief executive officer of our fiercest corporate competitor. She was a ruthless woman who routinely dragged Carter's name through the mud in business magazines, openly despising him and our entire company. Seeing her there, bruised and very much alive in the bed beside my husband, created a cognitive dissonance so loud it deafened me. Before I could even process the visual of my husband and his sworn corporate enemy sharing an emergency room cubicle, a hesitant police officer stepped into the small space. He cleared his throat awkwardly, his eyes darting away from my pregnant belly out of sheer pity. He explained the nature of the crash. The vehicle had veered off a rocky cliff at high speed. The officer stammered, lowering his voice, and revealed that the severe nature of their injuries was exacerbated because neither of them was wearing a seatbelt. They were, in the officer's exact words, engaging in inappropriate intimate activities while driving when the car lost control. The words hung heavily in the sterile hospital air. My husband was not just having a sordid affair. He was risking his life and the future of our unborn child for a cheap thrill on a rainy highway with our biggest rival. I stood completely frozen. My gaze drifted away from the embarrassed officer and landed squarely on Valerie. That was when I saw it. Resting against her collarbone, partially hidden by her torn silk dress, was a heavy silver pendant. It was not just any piece of jewelry. It was my personal biometric encryption pendant. That exact device required my unique pulse signature and contained the master access keys to the most heavily guarded, top-secret data vaults of Aegis Nexus Solutions. Suddenly, a sharp groan broke the silence. Carter was waking up. His eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the harsh fluorescent lights above. I rushed to his side, my maternal instinct briefly overriding the blinding rage of his infidelity. I reached out for his hand, tears streaming down my cold face. Carter looked at me, then looked past me to Valerie. His expression instantly hardened into a cold, irritated scowl. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask if the baby was okay after my terrifying drive through the storm. Instead, he glared at the attending nurse and barked a harsh command. He ordered the medical staff to kick me out of the room immediately, loudly proclaiming that he needed to protect Valerie's honor and ensure her privacy. In that fraction of a second, the Bridget who loved him died. The world I had built around my family crumbled into absolute dust. The weeping, vulnerable, pregnant wife vanished, replaced by something entirely different. The calculating, ruthless logic of a top-tier hacker violently snapped into place. I turned around, walked out of that hospital room without shedding another single tear, and began formulating a protocol for his total destruction. I drove back to our sprawling glass and steel penthouse. It was completely silent. The storm outside now reduced to a heavy, rhythmic thud against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I refused to let a single tear fall. Crying was a human response, and right now, I needed to function like a machine. I walked straight to my private server room, a reinforced sanctuary Carter never dared to enter. Over 12 months ago, I had noticed minor, almost imperceptible anomalies in the data logs of Aegis Nexus Solutions. Suspecting a high-level corporate leak, I had discreetly embedded a network of microscopic, audio-enabled surveillance lenses throughout our home, masking their IP addresses through proxy servers in Eastern Europe. It was time to pull the logs. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. The massive curved monitor flared to life, illuminating the dark room with grids of high-definition video feeds. I initiated a deep scan, cross-referencing Carter's presence with unauthorized biometric access attempts. The results populated instantly. I sat there, paralyzed by the sheer volume of betrayal unfolding on the screen. For 24 months, Carter and Valerie had been using my own home, my own sanctuary, as their private playground. I watched them drinking my vintage wine, mocking my dedication to my work, and engaging in acts that made my stomach churn violently. But the physical infidelity was merely a symptom of a much more malignant disease. I synchronized the timestamp of the car crash with the footage from earlier that exact evening. The screen showed Carter and Valerie standing in my home office. Carter was holding the biometric encryption pendant I had seen on Valerie at the hospital. He pressed it against my secure terminal. A progress bar appeared on the screen within the video. They were not just having a sordid affair, they were actively siphoning the beta framework of my crowning achievement, a revolutionary artificial intelligence algorithm designed for predictive cybersecurity defense. The crash had occurred while they were recklessly speeding down the coast, drunkenly celebrating their successful corporate espionage. But the true horror was buried in an audio file recorded just 3 days prior. I boosted the vocal frequencies and listened to my husband's voice echoing through the cold server room. Carter was pacing the living room, pouring a drink for Valerie, outlining a strategy so incredibly depraved it chilled me to the bone. He explained that my company shares and the sole patent rights to the algorithm were currently valued at $15 million. He told Valerie that divorcing me outright would mean splitting the assets and risking a lengthy legal battle over intellectual property. Instead, he proposed a timeline that capitalized on my physical vulnerability. Carter planned to wait until the exact moment I went into active labor, when the contractions peaked and the medical staff administered the epidural, rendering me drugged, exhausted, and incapable of coherent legal thought. He would present the asset transfer documents disguised as standard hospital consent forms. He laughed with Valerie about how easy it would be to guide my shaking hand to sign away my life's work. But taking my money was not enough. Once the $15 million were secured, Carter intended to deploy a series of forged psychiatric evaluations. He had already bribed a corrupt physician to diagnose me with severe postpartum paranoid psychosis. His ultimate endgame was to strip me of all maternal rights, seize full custody of our daughter, and commit me to a high-security, isolated psychiatric facility indefinitely. He wanted to erase me from existence. The man who kissed my pregnant belly every morning was actively constructing a prison for my mind and body. A lesser woman would have screamed, shattered the monitor, and marched straight back to the hospital to demand a divorce. But anger is undisciplined. Vengeance, true vengeance, requires absolute precision. I took a deep breath, placing a protective hand over my swollen abdomen, and made a silent vow to my unborn daughter. I would not be a victim. I would become the perfect prey. I picked up my phone and drafted a text message to Carter. I carefully curated every single word to feed his massive ego and reinforce his delusion of control. Carter, I am so completely devastated. The doctors pushed me out. I know I have been awful lately, neglecting our marriage and prioritizing my work over your needs. Please forgive me. Focus on recovering. I will be right here waiting for you, trying to be the wife you deserve. I hit send. It was a digital white flag, a pathetic surrender designed to make him drop every single defensive barrier he had left. With Carter successfully neutralized by his own arrogance, I opened an encrypted, decentralized communication protocol on a separate secure laptop. I typed a specialized string of characters, reaching out into the darkest corners of the digital underground. I was contacting Dexter. Dexter was a phantom, a legendary white hat hacker who had vanished from the public grid nearly a decade ago. We shared a history of exposing corrupt data brokers, and he was the only person on the planet whose intellect rivaled my own. The screen blinked green as a secure tunnel established a connection. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I began laying the foundation for a massive, inescapable digital web, a technological guillotine specifically engineered to sever Carter and Valerie from their wealth, their freedom, and their sanity. The hunt had officially begun. Carter was discharged from the hospital exactly 5 days later. He returned to our penthouse wearing the mask of a deeply traumatized victim, utilizing his bandaged forehead to solicit unwarranted sympathy from our mutual acquaintances. But behind closed doors, he unleashed a campaign of absolute psychological terror. He employed weaponized silence, refusing to acknowledge my presence or my heavily pregnant state. His cold violence was suffocating, designed to make me feel entirely isolated in my own home. This calculated cruelty culminated on a Tuesday evening. He walked into the kitchen, his face devoid of any emotion, and slammed a sleek digital tablet onto the marble island. "Sign this post-nuptial agreement immediately. Bridget," he demanded, his voice chillingly flat. "If you refuse, I have already prepared a dossier of fabricated digital evidence. I will hand it over to the federal authorities, proving you sold the core secrets of Aegis Nexus Solutions to foreign intelligence operatives. You will spend the next 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, and I will raise our child alone." I looked at him, forcing my eyes to brim with terrified tears. I played the role of the broken, hormonal wife with Oscar-worthy precision. I sobbed quietly, begging him to reconsider, whispering how frightened I was for our family. "Please, Carter, I will sign whatever you want, just to keep us together," I cried out softly. What my arrogant husband did not realize was that I had intercepted the document the moment his lawyer emailed it to his private server. Within the digital signature line, I had embedded a highly sophisticated, polymorphic stealth Trojan. I picked up his biometric stylus with trembling hands and signed my name on the glowing screen. I handed the tablet back to him, smirking in triumph. Carter pressed his thumb against the device to authorize and encrypt the final save. The moment the digital ink dried, my payload executed silently in the background, Instantly, the firewall of his entire digital life crumbled. Every single device he owned, his encrypted mobile phone, his offshore banking applications, and his private communication servers, fell entirely under my absolute control. I now owned his digital soul. While Carter played his cruel games at home, Valerie was busy parading her stolen victory to the entire world. She appeared on the digital cover of Silicon Valley's most prestigious business magazine. The high-resolution photograph showed her smiling with unearned arrogance, projecting the image of a visionary genius. But what made my blood boil was the heavy silver biometric pendant resting prominently against her collarbone. She was wearing my stolen access key like a war trophy. The bold headline beneath her portrait quoted her directly: "Get ready for a new technological revolution that will render our competitors obsolete within 6 months." She truly believed she was untouchable, blindly trusting the stolen algorithm they had violently ripped from my private servers, operating from the shadows of my fortified network. Dexter and I began sifting through Carter's newly compromised data footprint. The truth we uncovered was far more sinister than simple corporate greed. Carter's boutique venture capital fund was not just underperforming, it was catastrophically bankrupt. Digging deeper into his hidden ledgers, we discovered a massive, off-the-books deficit. Carter owed tens of millions of dollars to a notoriously violent Eastern European syndicate specializing in international money laundering. The stolen artificial intelligence algorithm was never just about making a fortune for him and Valerie. It was a desperate ransom payment. It was the only asset valuable enough to keep the syndicate from putting a bullet in his head. The stakes had escalated from a divorce settlement to a matter of life and death. Dexter and I coordinated a synchronized digital strike. We infiltrated the stolen algorithm currently housed on Valerie's highly secure cloud servers, operating at lightning speed. I began the meticulous process of hollowing it out. I started systematically swapping the authentic, functional core data blocks with highly volatile, self-destructing malware. We were 90% complete when the sheer physiological toll of the extreme stress shattered my composure. A sudden, blinding agony ripped through my lower abdomen. My breath caught in my throat as my knees buckled, sending me crashing heavily into my ergonomic office chair. It was a severe premature uterine contraction, a terrifying warning that my body was preparing for early labor. The pain was absolutely excruciating, threatening to drag my mind into a state of unconsciousness. My vision blurred wildly as another violent wave of agony spiked through my spine. "Bridget, your biometric telemetry is highly erratic. You need to call an ambulance and get to a hospital right now." Dexter's voice crackled urgently through my encrypted earpiece. "Not until this is done," I gasped, the words tearing out of my throat. I wrapped my left arm protectively around my swollen belly, curling inward to shield the fragile life inside me. I whispered desperate promises of safety to my unborn daughter, praying she would hold on just a little longer. With my right hand, trembling so violently I could barely hit the individual keys, I continued to type the final execution commands. I rode the agonizing waves of physical torture, pushing through a haze of pure suffering. My maternal instinct to protect my child fused with my cold determination to annihilate the monsters who threatened her future. Finally, through eyes blurred with tears of pain, I hit the enter key. The malicious payload locked seamlessly into place within Valerie's servers. The digital trap was completely primed, completely undetectable, and completely lethal. Only when I saw the confirmation code flash green on my screen did I allow myself to lean back and breathe, knowing their destruction was now inevitable. Exactly 3 weeks passed since that agonizing night in my server room. The terrifying premature physical contractions had eventually subsided, thanks to strict bed rest and intensive medical monitoring, allowing my unborn daughter to remain safe inside me. Meanwhile, Carter and Valerie were busy preparing for their grand corporate coronation. They hosted the most obnoxiously lavish, over-the-top technology gala Silicon Valley had ever witnessed. The venue was a sprawling, ultra-modern glass conservatory, perched high on a cliff, overlooking the rolling hills and crashing waves of the California coast. Inside, the sheer extravagance was sickening. Giant ice sculptures carved into the intricate shapes of silicon microchips adorned the endless buffet tables, while an army of waitstaff carried silver trays loaded with imported caviar and vintage champagne that cost thousands of dollars per single bottle. It was a grotesque, satirical display of unearned wealth and fake glamour. Tonight was the official public announcement of their corporate merger and the grand unveiling of what they proudly dubbed the artificial intelligence algorithm of the century. They were entirely convinced their corporate espionage was a flawless, untraceable victory. The main house lights dimmed, bathing the grand hall in a sleek, futuristic blue glow that reflected off the expensive jewelry of the attendees. Carter strutted onto the elevated glass podium, radiating the toxic, unearned confidence of a man who firmly believed he had outsmarted everyone in the room. He held a crystal glass of dark red wine, swirling it with practiced arrogance. He tapped the microphone, the sharp sound echoing through the massive acoustic space, and began his keynote address. After praising his own visionary genius for a solid 20 minutes, his tone shifted to something noticeably darker, sharper, and deeply vindictive. Reaching the absolute pinnacle of this industry requires painful sacrifice. Carter projected his voice over the high-definition speakers, a sickening smirk playing on his lips. It requires cutting ties with the past. To achieve billionaire status, one must be willing to ruthlessly eliminate all toxic, stagnant personal burdens that hold you back from true greatness. The entire room knew exactly who he was talking about. It was a thinly veiled, cowardly public execution of our marriage, delivered to thunderous applause from his sycophantic peers. I watched this sickening spectacle unfold through the live security camera feeds Dexter had effortlessly hacked into earlier that afternoon. But my focus was not solely on my soon-to-be ex-husband. I closely analyzed the front row of the exclusive VIP section. Sitting there, dressed in impeccably tailored imported suits, were the shadowy international investors. These were the high-ranking members of the violent Eastern European money laundering syndicate Dexter and I had uncovered in Carter's hidden financial ledgers. They were sipping their expensive drinks, smiling coldly, eagerly waiting for their massive financial investments to multiply tenfold once the software launched. They looked like hungry apex predators waiting for a feast. They had absolutely no idea they were sitting directly on top of a digital ticking time bomb, and I was the one securely holding the detonator. It was finally time to crash the party. I stepped out of my heavily tinted, armored utility vehicle, feeling the cool evening ocean breeze against my face. I was exactly 8 months pregnant now, carrying a significant amount of weight, but I absolutely refused to look vulnerable. I wore a custom-tailored, structurally reinforced black velvet evening gown that draped elegantly over my swollen belly. The dress made me look less like a grieving, discarded wife and much more like an executioner arriving at the gallows to collect a debt. I pushed past the velvet VIP ropes outside. The massive, heavy oak double doors of the grand hall were heavily guarded, but my fabricated top-tier clearance code, courtesy of Dexter's genius, granted me immediate, unquestioned access. I pushed the heavy doors open with a forceful thrust. The loud thud echoed sharply, immediately drawing the attention of the nearly 1,000 elite guests. As I walked slowly down the central illuminated aisle, the deafening, arrogant chatter of the tech elite died instantly. The crowd naturally parted for me like the Red Sea. My presence was so sharp, so absolutely unapologetic and overwhelmingly powerful, that the entire hall fell into a suffocating, dead silence. All you could hear was the rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished marble floor. From his elevated position on the podium, all the color instantly drained from Carter's arrogant face. His smug, victorious smirk vanished, rapidly replaced by sheer, unfiltered panic. He fumbled frantically with the sleek earpiece hidden in his left ear, desperately signaling his private security team. I could read his trembling lips perfectly as he frantically whispered into his lapel microphone, ordering his muscular guards to intercept me, to drag me out into the street before I could ruin his perfect billion-dollar moment. He was genuinely terrified that I was there to cause a hysterical scene, to cry and beg in front of his elite audience like a broken woman. He still vastly underestimated the predator I had become. The security guards rushed forward from the shadows, but before they could even reach me, I had already glided gracefully to the front of the stage where Valerie was standing, basking in the spotlight. I did not scream. I did not shed a single pathetic tear. I calmly reached out and picked up a fresh flute of expensive champagne from a frozen waiter's tray. I maintained a warm, terrifyingly calm smile as I approached the woman who had tried to steal my husband, my company, and my sanity. I raised my crystal glass toward her, forcing her to mirror the gesture to avoid a massive public relations scandal on the live stream. As our glasses clinked together with a sharp, delicate ring, I leaned in extremely close, breathing in the scent of her overly expensive perfume, bringing my lips just an inch from her ear. Do you know why the biometric pendant you are wearing right now has a targeted destruction tracking feature? I whispered softly into her ear. The confident, radiant smile on the female chief executive officer's face instantly froze solid, her eyes widening in absolute paralyzing horror as the devastating weight of my words finally sank in. Valerie stepped back from me, a visibly violent shudder ripping through her spine. She blinked rapidly, desperately trying to process my cryptic warning about the biometric pendant. But her massive ego ultimately overpowered her momentary terror. She plastered on a fake, rigid smile for the flashing cameras and turned her back to me. Her high heels clicked sharply as she ascended the final steps to the main presentation podium. This was her crowning moment, and she was not going to let a pregnant, scorned wife derail it. She reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer and pulled out a sleek, solid-state hard drive. She believed with every fiber of her being that this drive contained the finalized, fully functional core data of my predictive artificial intelligence algorithm. With a theatrical flourish, she plugged the device directly into the central server terminal on the stage. The massive screen behind her flared to life, projecting the company logo to the eager audience of hundreds of industry leaders. A sleek, minimalist loading bar appeared on the colossal high-definition screen, dominating the entire hall. The progress tracker began ticking upward, climbing steadily toward completion. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft humming of the massive processors working overtime. 50%, 75%, 90%. Valerie stood tall, her chest puffed out in absolute triumph, ready to accept her standing ovation. I remained perfectly still at the base of the stage, calmly reaching into my designer clutch. I pulled out my heavily encrypted mobile phone. The screen displayed a single, glowing execution command interface, exactly when the loading bar hit 100%, and a cheerful chime echoed through the speakers signaling the system was ready. I pressed my thumb firmly against the glass screen. The highly anticipated software demonstration interface instantly vanished. The giant screen blinked black for a fraction of a second before roaring back to life with a crystal-clear, high-resolution video feed. It was not a graphical interface of artificial intelligence. It was the intimate security footage from my very own penthouse. A collective, horrified gasp echoed through the massive conservatory. High above us, on a screen 50 feet wide, Carter and Valerie were projected in vivid detail, deeply entangled in a passionate, illicit embrace on my living room sofa. But the visual infidelity was not the main event. The hall's state-of-the-art surround sound system amplified the audio track I had painstakingly enhanced. My husband's voice boomed through the speakers, casually discussing his incredibly vile scheme. The entire elite audience listened in dead, stunned silence as Carter detailed exactly how he planned to drug me during labor, force me to sign away my $15 million patent, and use forged medical documents to lock me away in a secure psychiatric facility forever. The audio continued, exposing their joint conspiracy to defraud their international investors by falsely inflating the capabilities of the stolen technology. The sheer depravity of their conversation echoed off the glass walls, stripping away every ounce of their meticulously crafted public personas. Before the audience could even fully digest the horrifying revelation, the video feed abruptly cut out. A massive, blindingly bright red alert banner slammed across the display. This was the ultimate twist. The digital guillotine I had built with Dexter. The stolen hard drive Valerie had so proudly connected to her central mainframe did not contain my artificial intelligence. It contained the highly volatile, self-replicating malware payload I had coded through agonizing labor pains. The red text on the screen began scrolling at a terrifying speed, displaying the real-time execution of the destruction protocol. A synthesized voice blared through the emergency speakers, announcing the critical failure. The malicious code had bypassed every single firewall Valerie's company possessed. It was systematically encrypting, corrupting, and permanently deleting every single byte of data across their entire global server network. In exactly 3 seconds, tens of millions of dollars in corporate infrastructure, client databases, financial ledgers, and proprietary research completely evaporated. The screen flashed a final, mocking message in bold white letters over a blood-red background: "System wiped, all data formatted to 0, welcome to the Stone Age." Total pandemonium erupted. Carter let out a primal scream of pure panic. He sprinted across the stage, frantically grabbing the hard drive and violently yanking it out of the terminal. When the red screen of death remained, he grabbed a heavy crystal award off the podium and began smashing the control console, desperately trying to force a hard reboot. It was completely useless. Dexter had engaged an impenetrable remote lockdown, permanently bricking their hardware. Down in the VIP section, the terrifying reality of the situation finally hit the shadowy investors. The Eastern European Syndicate members realized simultaneously that the revolutionary technology they had invested heavily in was a complete sham, and their laundered millions were gone forever. The cold, calculated smiles vanished from their faces, replaced by an aura of pure, murderous intent. 4 massive men in tailored suits stood up in unison. They did not scream. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, vaulting over the velvet ropes and aggressively surrounding the base of the stage, cutting off Carter's only exit path. On the stage, the alliance between the two traitors spectacularly disintegrated. Valerie, realizing her entire empire, her life's work, and her freedom had just been annihilated because of the poisoned asset Carter brought her, completely lost her mind. She lunged at him, her face contorted in absolute fury. With a sickeningly loud crack that was picked up by the microphone, she slapped Carter across the face so hard it spun him around. He stumbled backward, bleeding from his lip, and instantly retaliated by shoving her violently against the shattered console. The two lovers, who had been arrogantly toasting to their fraudulent success just 2 minutes prior, were now viciously tearing each other apart like cornered rats. They screamed accusations, pointing fingers and shifting blame, entirely forgetting that hundreds of high-definition camera lenses belonging to the press were broadcasting their pathetic, violent downfall live to the entire world. Just as the physical altercation on the stage reached a fever pitch, the piercing wail of heavy sirens violently shattered the remaining chaos in the hall. Through the massive glass walls of the conservatory, an absolute sea of flashing red and blue emergency lights illuminated the darkness. The heavy oak doors that I had walked through moments ago were suddenly blown wide open. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, flanked by tactical operatives from the National Cybersecurity Division, flooded into the venue. They moved with terrifying speed, shouting commands and securing the perimeter. I had not just sat back and watched them self-destruct. The night before this gala, I had anonymously transmitted a heavily encrypted, meticulously categorized digital dossier to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. It contained every single piece of video evidence, audio recordings, and the undeniable financial ledgers connecting them to the money laundering syndicate. The agents swarmed the stage. Carter was brutally tackled to the polished floor, his cheek pressed forcefully against the shattered glass of the ruined control console. The cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists as an agent loudly read him his rights, explicitly citing charges of severe economic espionage, massive financial fraud, and deliberate deception of international investors. Valerie did not fare any better. She was violently pinned against the wall, her designer gown ruined, screaming hysterically as another agent arrested her for the illegal possession of highly classified stolen data and extensive corporate money laundering. The federal prosecutor had already assured me they would both be facing a minimum of 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, with absolutely zero possibility of early parole. As the agents dragged them roughly down the center aisle toward the waiting armored transport vehicles, their path brought them directly past where I was standing perfectly still. The moment Carter made eye contact with me, his entire demeanor crumbled into pathetic desperation. He violently yanked himself out of the agent's grip just enough to collapse onto his knees right at my feet. The arrogant billionaire facade was completely gone, replaced by a sobbing, broken man. Tears streamed down his bruised face as he desperately begged me to call off the federal authorities, pleading for mercy in the name of our unborn child. He swore he would change. I slowly looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but profound disgust. I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping to a whisper as cold as solid ice. My child will never have a criminal for a father. The agents hauled him back to his feet and dragged him out into the stormy night, his desperate screams fading into the wail of the sirens. The aftermath was swift and utterly merciless. Within exactly 48 hours, a federal judge ordered the immediate and total freezing of every single asset Carter possessed. Without my functional algorithm, and with their entire data infrastructure permanently erased, Valerie's once towering corporate empire immediately declared complete bankruptcy. Through emergency legal proceedings, I was officially granted 100% ownership of my revolutionary patent. My professional reputation was completely restored to a level of untouchable prestige, and the court awarded me the entirety of our marital estate as financial restitution for his fraudulent conspiracy. 4 months later, the violent storm of the past felt like a distant nightmare. The morning sun poured through the massive windows of my highly secure, custom-built modern villa overlooking the peaceful West Coast ocean. I sat in a plush rocking chair, smiling with a profound, quiet joy as I gently cradled my beautiful, perfectly healthy newborn daughter in my arms. She was sleeping soundly, completely safe, and wonderfully untainted by the toxic, destructive history of the man who helped create her. I gently placed her into her customized crib, then walked over to the massive mahogany desk in my home office. I sat down in the luxurious leather chair, looking out at the endless blue horizon. I am now the sole chief executive officer of a brand new, multi-billion-dollar technology empire, a company I proudly named after my baby girl. As I logged into my secure network to begin the day, a profound realization washed over me. The absolute most perfect revenge in this world does not require you to get your own hands dirty or bloody. The ultimate revenge is simply standing tall at the radiant, undeniable peak of your own success, looking down in perfect peace, and watching the people who betrayed you desperately dig their own permanent graves. Thank you so incredibly much for taking the time to listen to my story today. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now? We always love reading your comments and knowing where our amazing listeners are located. If you enjoyed this journey and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. We have a massive collection of the absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube due to their intense nature. You can easily support us by scanning the quick response code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and stay safe.